I've been collecting video games for over 15 years, and while I have a lot of video games, 914 in fact, I still have some games that are on my list, and there's a couple of elusive ones. Some people call these Holy Grails, the one game that is so hard to find or just prohibitively expensive that it just becomes a distant dream. But the issue that I have with calling these games Holy Grails is that it really dilutes into just a game that's expensive. Earthbound, Holy Grail, Little Samson, Holy Grail, Panzer Dragoon Saga, you get the point. There are plenty of copies of these games available for purchase if you have the money to spend. Now, I get that not everybody wants to spend that kind of money on a single video game. I have been eyeing Little Samson for a while now, and I just can't bring myself to plunk down $1,500 on a video game that I'll probably play for a little bit and then let it rest on my shelf, occasionally showing it off to some friends. But I don't consider just expensive games Holy Grails. I consider them white whales. If you look at the terminology used, there's only one Holy Grail. It's sought after by a bunch of people, and a lot of times people aren't even sure that it exists, and if it does, it's probably not for sale. White whales, on the other hand, are pretty rare, but they exist in the terms of Moby Dick. People obsess over finding them, and while they see them from time to time, they elude capture. I think white whale is much more appropriate of a term for these types of games than Holy Grail. I've been on the lookout for Little Samson for a while, and I do have some heavy hitters in my collection already, Bubble Bobble 2 and DuckTales 2, and those evaded my capture for quite a while as well. I consider those white whales as simply because, again, there's only one Holy Grail. And the reason why I say that is because if one game is your Holy Grail and you get it, do you stop collecting or do you continue getting more games? Do you turn your focus on another Holy Grail? And that's why I think calling them Holy Grails is kind of bunk, and I instead refer to them as white whales. Once I obtain Bubble Bobble 2 and DuckTales 2, I turn my focus onto more elusive games, Little Samson being the main bread and butter. So if expensive elusive games are white whales, then what is a Holy Grail? A Holy Grail is a one-of-a-kind item, something that doesn't show up for sale in conventions after conventions, and I'm thinking prototypes should be considered Holy Grails, or just items that were thought to be a myth but turned out to be real. And that's why my Holy Grail is the Nintendo PlayStation, the device that Nintendo and Sony got together to make, and then the deal fell apart. Sony would go on to create the PlayStation, and Nintendo would partner with Philips to make the CDI. But we did get 3 Zelda games and a Mario game, you know, the ones that Nintendo refuses to acknowledge to this day. Nintendo and Sony had a pretty good relationship in the beginning. Sony would make the sound trips in the NES and SNES, making them far superior than the competition. With the CD-ROM becoming more and more popular, it made sense that CDs would be the next gaming medium. They were already significantly cheaper than cartridges and could fit substantially more data. Sega and NEC, the makers behind the TurboGrafx-16, already had CD add-ons for their consoles. So Nintendo worked with Sony to develop a CD add-on for the Super Nintendo. You always see the expansion ports on the bottom of early Nintendo consoles, but rarely do you see them utilized, at least in the United States. The CD add-on was teased in Nintendo Power, and I know as a kid I was really excited for this. Prior to the internet days, I was always hounding my local game store to ask when the Super Nintendo CD add-on was coming. Nintendo got cold feet, and at literally the last minute, right before Sony was set to unveil the PlayStation, they announced that they would be partnering with Philips to create a CD system instead. Sony obviously wasn't too pleased, but before they threw away all of their plans for the PlayStation, they were convinced to keep it around and make their own system. Since Nintendo pulled a dick move on fellow Japanese company Sony, a lot of Japanese developers that had relationships with Nintendo flocked to Sony. Of course, Nintendo's insistence on cartridges for the next console, the Nintendo 64, didn't do it any favors either. For decades, the Sony Nintendo PlayStation was just an idea on paper until Terry and Dan Diebold showed it off on Reddit in 2015. Naturally, a lot of people thought it was a hoax. No one up until this point knew that this thing was real, at least to the public. Dan and Terry would take it to Hong Kong of all places and fire it up to see if it would work, and it did, but the CD portion failed. Then notorious tech wizard Ben Heck got his hands on it and was able to get it running CDs, and the Nintendo PlayStation would then go on tour from convention to convention. I actually got to see it back in April at the Midwest Gaming Convention in Milwaukee. It was a sight to behold, and I really wish it was me who found it in the pile of items up for auction at a defunct company. Dan only paid $75 for this. Now the Nintendo PlayStation prototype is looking for a buyer, and I really want it. And I just need $100,000 to place an offer, and that's not even a guarantee that I'll be able to get it. Dan and Terry haven't stated what they'll actually sell the Nintendo PlayStation for, but it will probably go for a substantial chunk of change. It's literally the only known device of its time, and I really hope that whoever decides to buy this thing doesn't store it away forever. I know that rare pieces of art eventually get lent to museums, but it's very unlikely that we'll see the Nintendo PlayStation prototype in public for a very long time. That is my holy grail, the Nintendo PlayStation, a system I probably will never have in my possession, but maybe I can snag one of those SNES store displays. That wraps it up for this video, and I want to know, what is your holy grail? Do you have any white whales in your collection? Let me know in the comments below. And if you like this video, give it a like, and if you're new here, in addition to these collecting discussion videos, I have a series called Retronomics, where I evaluate the prices in video games. My latest episode covers Metal Jesus Rocks and how he affects retro video game prices, and many more episodes, including how the Atari Lynx prices trend. So if that's something that you enjoyed, consider subscribing for future content. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Super Nintendo, and I'll see you next time.